But yeah, it's just putting your ear to the ground. So, for example, if an author is new and they're listening to this and they're like, but how do I put my ear to the ground? I would ask them to think about, how do they consume books? If they only read paperbacks, then they will not, through their own buyer behavior, notice what happens in ebook purchasing or on ebook lists. If they want to apply to BookBub, for example, which has been a huge marketing partner in my business, you have to subscribe to the BookBub emails. Mm-hmm. And if you say to me, but I don't like getting daily emails, well, that's a part of your job, right? We don't like all the parts of our jobs. And looking at the daily BookBub email is a part of my job.
Welcome to the Author Like a Boss podcast, the podcast for indie authors who want to improve their writing, up-level their marketing, make money with their books, and have fun doing it. Now, on to the show with your host, Ella Barnard.
Hey bosses, exciting news this week. We are hosting the first annual giveaway for authors. The grand prize for this giveaway has everything you need to be successful as an indie author. You can enter to win this amazing grand prize at authorlikeaboss.com/giveaway. I am so excited to tell you about some of the prizes that you can enter to win. Carol M. Vaughn is offering to developmentally edit your entire story. This prize alone is worth $800. You also have a chance to win a custom designed book cover from realindiecovers.com. Melissa Storm is offering an all-access pass to yourauthorengine.com. Stacey Sowers, who has been on the podcast multiple times, is offering a personalized author website from Authors Mojo. We have editing services, we have courses. Author Like a Boss is including the complete Author Boss newsletter kit and so much more. In fact, the total grand prize values at over $2,500. The great news is, even if you don't win the grand prize, there are some amazing Everyone Wins prizes available to everyone who participates. You can find the link to the giveaway in the show notes, or you can go directly to authorlikeaboss.com/giveaway. Hello, everybody. Hello, bosses. We are here today with Zoe York. Zoe York is the USA Today best-selling author of more than 50 books, some of them written as Ainsley Booth. She lives in London, Ontario, Canada, where she is a full-time writer, a full-time mom, and a very part-time family chef. I don't know. I said it right the first time and then bungled it the second time, but that's all right. It's all right.
Yeah, that's fine.
People know. People know. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So let's just jump right in. And can you tell us a little bit about your author journey, like where you started and where up all the way through until where you are now?
Sure. So like a lot of romance authors, I was a romance reader first for a very long time, since I was a teenager, basically. And I came and went from the genre and from certain subgenres. For a long time, I read a lot of romantic suspense. I went on a historical binge. And then when I was on maternity leave with my second son, I read a lot of small town romance. And I got to the end of one series and I thought, I want to read something just like this, but set in Canada. And then ideas just started coming to me. And I had been a writer in a professional capacity in a bunch of different ways over my career. I'd never written fiction before. So my first many attempts were not professional. They were amateur hack attempts at what genre fiction was. So I did some professional development. I took some courses. And finally, I finished a book. And that book was What Once Was Perfect, which was the first novel I ever published. It's book 2 in my Wardom series. It was the first book that I released, but then I ended up renumbering them later on because I learned a lot about marketing over the years. And, you start to reorganize your back catalog to kind of fit with the market expectations a little bit.
Oh, we're so going to go into that later.
We can go into that for sure. So that my first book and I released it. It's a Christmas story. And so, of course, I released it in June of 2013. These things that we learn over the years not to do. And so I published my first book June 2013, and I was a part-time writer for a year. And then I was laid off, and I had an opportunity. Should I use my severance period to write, or should I use it to look for another job? I wasn't really yet at the point where I could say I'm a full-time writer. I certainly wasn't earning full-time money. But I had a chance there, and that you never get an opportunity like that again, where you have a severance package that you can basically pay yourself for a period of time.
Yes.
To write. And so I took the plunge, and it was really scary and full of doubt. Like, absolutely, I was not sure it was going to work. But that was the second half of 2014. And since then, I just haven't looked back. I've been a full-time writer since then.
Wow. Okay. I have so many questions.
Let's get to it.
I have so many questions. Okay. First, I would like to know, I love how professional you sound when you're like, I did some courses, I did some professional development on my writing career. Like professional development.
Can you tell I used to work in academia?
Yes. Yes, I can. Okay. So what kind of courses or professional development, I love that so much, did you do to improve your writing?
So I took a bunch of courses, like individual ones through the Margie Lawson Academy.
Mm-hmm. And
the one that made the biggest difference for me was actually once I had finally, I also read some books, Goal, Motivation, Conflict by Deb Dixon. Is that her name? GMC. It's like the standard, if you just Amazon search Goals, Motivation, Conflict. Mm-hmm. Pretty sure her name is Deb Dixon. That book was huge. And then once I finally finished a first draft, I took a course called Before You Hit Send by Angela James, who's the executive editor of Carina Press. Mm-hmm. And back in my day, you had to wait until she offered that class because she only offered it twice a year. Now it's actually available like on demand.
Evergreen. Yeah.
Yeah, which is so smart. And I happened to see it just the other day. And it looks so slick. Like we were in a forum, and she would post the lessons manually each day. And now it's just such a pretty looking course. And the price isn't actually much more than what I paid for it 7 years ago.
Wow.
So that's amazing. That course I highly recommend. That was the one that really took me from amateur to professional in a single course. Like that, I cannot speak highly enough of that course.
Wow. Awesome. Okay. So professional development complete. Okay. So I'm also curious about what the difference looked like between part-time and full-time writing.
Yes, that is such a good question because the difference is huge. And I actually, once upon a time, I thought I might like to teach a course. And it turns out that I don't like doing that so much, but I ran a beta course. And one of the lessons was about picking your next writing project. It is so hard to change your current writing project, wherever your heart is right now, whatever your muse is attached to, that you're not going to radically change that project. But your next project, the next one that you undertake, if you go into that project with a hope that you're going to make money on it, that it's going to be a commercial success, that at one point you're going to make the first book in that series free, for example, you will write that book differently from the very beginning. You will craft it completely differently from the very beginning. And that lesson is the lesson that I learned when I went from part-time to full-time, because when I was a part-time writer, I wrote that passion project, that small town set in Canada, local to me series that I just really wanted to read. I wrote the book that I wanted to read. Mm-hmm. And that series found fans. That series made me so happy, but it wasn't centered in the marketplace. And that was fine when I had a full-time job to support my family. That is less fine when I want writing to be my full-time job that supports my family. And going from part-time to full-time, saying I want to earn full-time money from writing, completely changed what I wrote.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I have some people that I know that they have, and they're early on in their career. So I'm like, play around with what you like until you know what you want to do permanently, but don't expect to make money.
Yeah. The passion project. I mean, and to be honest, I am one of those people who will split my time. I will give X amount of my time to the project that will make me money, and another part of my time to the project that just makes me happy. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. But I do think that if your actions are not meeting your stated goals, you probably need to go back and figure out where the disconnect is.
So I love that answer. I think so what are you writing? Like you were writing small town fiction in Canada. So, and now how did that shift? Like literally.
Yeah, so some of the changes were actually almost invisible to the reader. So I was laid off. I was in the middle of a series about, I just started. So what happened was, sorry, we're gonna back. So I had started one series, my Wardham series, which is small town set in Canada, very heroine centric. It's a group of women who are friends, and the small town, like Wardham is a small town name that somebody who lives in like New England or Southwestern Ontario would recognize as a small town name, but it's not as universal small town for people on the West Coast. It's not recognizable as a town name. So that just literally the town name was a bit of a problem. I had just started writing Navy SEALs, which was something that I started doing as a group project with Cora Seaton and Elle James and Delilah Devlin and Sharon Hamilton for our Seals of Summer box set. And back in 2014, box sets were like, they could really break out a group of authors in a really big way. So we put a lot of energy into our Seals of Summer box set, and it debuted on the New York Times list. We hit number 6 on the New York Times list. Number 22 on the USA Today list. We sold 25,000 copies in release week. It was a huge success. But I could see my job at the university being eliminated. And it was such a stressful time for me that writing my story in that set was really hard for me. And that was a book called Fall Out, which is the first book now in my Seals Undone series. And I think I mentioned at the top that I, for quite a period there, read a lot of romantic suspense, and I thought that I would write romantic suspense. But I really struggled with actually putting that down on the paper. Fallout ended up being a short novella, and the suspense in it is kind of weak. It's important as an author to be able to be honest about that kind of thing. And literally, we hit the New York Times list the night before I was laid off. And that was such a crazy, surreal week for me. The highs and the lows, and then the high again, the potential to write full time. But what do I write? That was a huge question. Do I write more Navy SEAL stuff? That was so hard over the last 4 months, but the audience is clearly there. Or do I write the small town stuff that just pours out of me, but that doesn't sell as well? And I was really torn. And then I had an idea with the help of my reader group. And I think one of the pre-questions that we talked about was, what marketing did you have in place from the very beginning? Mm-hmm. I created a Facebook group when I was a brand new author. Like it was, one of those foundational things. You have your mailing list, your Facebook group, your Facebook page. This is back in the day before Instagram. And I created that Facebook group, and for a long time, it didn't have anybody in it. But by the time the Seals box set came out, I had probably like 60 or 80 active readers in that group. And so I was honest with them. I said, guys, I was just laid off, and it wasn't like the worst layoff in the world, but now I'm going to be a full-time writer, and I don't know what to write. I have the Seal series, which is just very beginning. And I don't honestly know what it's going to be. It's probably not going to be the romantic suspense that I first thought it was going to be. I have Wardham, which is literally where I got like all of those fans from. And I don't know what to write next. And then somebody said, why don't you put the two together? And I was like, oh, of course that's what you do. What was missing from my first small town series was military heroes. And I don't need to write romantic suspense to write military heroes. I can just write like military heroes in a small town setting. And so I created Pine Harbor, which you can tell has a more universally small town name.
Yep.
So I call Pine Harbor Wardham 2.0 because it's what I want to write, just tweaked to be a little bit more commercial, a little bit more mainstream. And for the last, what are we at now? 5 years, almost 5 years, Pine Harbor has kind of been the core of my Zoe brand.
Wow. And is working because you're a full-time author now.
Yeah. I mean, like we're at kind of a period of shift right now in contemporary romance because that is where I would place Pine Harbor as contemporary romance. But contemporary romance from 2014 feels a lot like women's fiction in 2019. So I'm not sure. I'm just wrapping that series up this year. I'm releasing the 8th book in October, and I'm honestly not sure where my next I will definitely write a new series set in the same town, but I'm just not sure if I would call it romance or if I'd call it women's fiction, or you kind of have to roll. You have to be very flexible and roll with the market tide.
This is what I always am wondering when I'm talking to authors. How do you know what the tide is?
Yeah.
Like, how do you find that out? Where?
So I remember I have a local friend, Ruth Hay. She's actually a friend of my mother-in-law's, and she writes women's fiction. And only because of her and only because of watching BookBub for her did I notice that the BookBub women's fiction listings have trended more and more romancy over the last 3 years. I noticed that Montlake Romance, for example, puts all of their releases in women's fiction now. And I may not have a complete set of data at my fingertips, but Amazon certainly does. So I pay attention to stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah. The people with the big money to track the big numbers, I just follow what they do.
Okay, so what are you looking at on Amazon?
I mean, like, often these observations happen accidentally. Like, I'll just see a book and I'll see that it's listing high in a category that I wouldn't have thought about. Sometimes I notice because I hear other people talking about it. Absolutely, women's fiction has been a topic that has come up, for example, at RWA Nationals the last 2 years. But it's also that idea of shifting categories. The idea of shifting genres gets a huge amount of pushback. I don't think about it as shifting genre. I just think about it as shifting a label or a category, which also gets a lot of pushback. But yeah, it's just putting your ear to the ground. So, for example, if an author is new and they're listening to this and they're like, but how do I put my ear to the ground? I would ask them to think about how do they consume books. If they only read paperbacks, then they will not, through their own buyer behavior, notice what happens in ebook purchasing or on ebook lists. If they want to apply to BookBub, for example, which has been a huge marketing partner in my business, you have to subscribe to the BookBub emails. And if you say to me, but I don't like getting daily emails, well, that's a part of your job, right? We don't like all the parts of our jobs. And looking at the daily BookBub email is a part of my job.
I love that. I love it. We don't love all the parts of our job.
We don't. Like, you know what? Like, if we loved every single part of being an author, it would still be a hobby. I feel the same way about developmental edits, about revisions, about, putting the effort in to get your graphics right, as opposed to just like the first hack at it is being good enough. No, the first hack at anything is not good enough.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. I still have a question though about the actual full-time, part-time writing, like how many words? Like, I'm like, can you get specific for me?
Yeah. I love specific numbers.
Yes.
How many words? Okay. So when I was writing part-time, and remember, like literally for everybody who's listening here, do not compare yourself to me. I can't compare myself to somebody else, but just in terms of percentage shift, I basically am able to write twice as much. So when I was writing part-time, I was able to do 250,000 words a year. And then I doubled that to about 500,000 words a year for 2014. So 2014, I wrote almost 500,000 words and it was actually in like 7.5 months. Well, a little, I wasn't writing full time for the whole year, but I just put my nose to the grindstone.
Mm-hmm.
And then I continued that 2015, 2016, 2017, the same, about 500,000 words a year. And then 2018 was a rough year for my family personally. Nothing major, just we had some serious shifts in a lot of stuff that was going on at home. And I really needed to take a step back. And so last year I only wrote 250,000 words, kind of like when I was writing part-time. And I was only writing part-time last year because I was being like a full-time mom and wife instead of having a full-time job. Mm-hmm. And this year I'm now back on track. I should, I think pretty easily write 500,000 words this year. So for me, very consistently over 7 years, that's been my part-time, full-time split is 250,000 words a year part-time and 500,000 full-time.
Cool. That's what I wanted to know. I'm like, how much is that? Give us numbers.
Yeah. And keep in mind, I tend to write either short or long. So that is not like, that's not 8 60,000 word books. That's like three or 4 really long books and then a bunch of novellas. And I do think that makes a big difference because a novella takes me significantly less time. Like 30,000 words for a novella takes me half the length of time it takes me to write the first 30,000 words in a 90,000 word book.
Why do you think that is?
Just because for me, the first third of a book is really hard. Well, I figure out who the main characters are. I do so much revision in the first act of a story. If I'm only doing that revision in 10,000 words, it happens so much faster. And then the second 2/3 of the book just kind of spills out once I know exactly what the story is. And to spill out 20,000 words once I know what the story is, that doesn't take any time at all. To spill out another 60,000 words after I've agonized over 30, it just takes forever. Like my last really full-length book was Love on the Outskirts of Town, which was my Pine Harbor book 7. And that from start to release, that took 9 or 10 months to write. Well, I was working on other things too. But that was an agonizing process.
Yeah. Do you write novellas at the same time as you're writing these other books?
Yeah. I write multiple stories at once.
Okay. And how does that affect your marketing or sales, do you think?
So it does affect it. Absolutely. But I feel like in the long term, it doesn't matter. That I have always gone for, because I worked for 10 years at a university, loved my different positions there, loved the stability of that full-time income. And when I was looking at shifting to writing full-time or looking for another job in education, I had to be confident in my ability to maintain a steady income. That's very important for me personally. Some people do really well with riding a high and, just banking that money and then going through a kind of a dry period before they hit the next high. That's not me. So I have always made publishing choices that go for the safe, slow, steady income, which means I never finish one series before I start a next. I will string out a series and slowly, like a snowball, build readership for that series over years. It does mean that I can't go big release, big release, big release, big release in a row because there's like a year between each release in a series. but it does mean that I hang on to more readers that way, but they don't necessarily cross from series to series. And I think that's always the case. There are lots of people who will work a model where they'll write a 3-book trilogy and they grab so many readers for that 3-book trilogy by releasing them right in a row. But then you may only capture someone's attention for that short period of time. And then you may only be able to take 20 or 30% of them to your next project.
What do you do to keep your readers engaged in between releases?
So a lot of that is social media and your newsletter. Actually, all of it is social media in your newsletter. All of that. What else would it be? That's all that it is. So, Facebook group, Instagram, your newsletter, mentioning. So, for example, Pine Harbor, I mention Pine Harbor in almost every Zoe newsletter that I send out, even though I only have one Pine Harbor release a year. So sometimes in my reader group, I will tell them like what's happening in Pine Harbor on any given day. Like a couple years ago, I wrote like this vignette about Wardham and Thanksgiving and what every single couple was doing for Canadian Thanksgiving. And it helps that some of my series are connected, like my Navy SEAL series, all those books kind of I have 2 Navy SEAL series and they intertwine. And so those series kind of feed each other. And then Wardham and Pine Harbor also feed each other a little bit. But yeah, mostly it's just keeping people on your mailing list and not like riding that fine line of engaging, but not overwhelming.
Yeah, that's
easier said than done.
Can you predict my next question?
Yeah.
How do you ride that line? What is it? So let me see, like, if I can get an example, like it's springtime. You guys currently it's springtime. And so you're like, springtime in Pine Harbor. Yeah. Everybody's starting to, especially if you're in Canada, it's like, oh, the grass is finally coming up a little bit and people are starting to plant their gardens.
Yeah.
or like,
that's pretty much it. Like,
okay.
So there's each of my books is about a different couple. So I would say, Xander and Faith are expecting their second child any day now. So they're in like max nesting mode. And that, somebody else is hosting planning Easter and kind of angsting over what to cook. What do you guys cook for Easter? Let me know. I mean, I just try and keep it light, but also enough, like not just giving them content, but also asking them for feedback and trying to make the characters as 3-dimensional and real as I possibly can. And then like, how often would I do that? That's not that often. It's not like a monthly update from Pine Harbor or anything like that. Once or twice a year, I would do something like that.
Okay.
Otherwise it becomes inauthentic. I like it to be like a rare treat. Okay. It's kind of like the parenting or teaching model of random reward. Like if a child can predict that they're going to get a reward for good behavior, then their motive for that good behavior becomes dubious. But if they are genuinely surprised when they're randomly rewarded for good behavior, then that will get them to repeat that behavior willingly on their own without further reward.
And you guys, this is just her background in academia. This is not actually the way she's not actually calling her readers children. But I do like to reward them, and I do want to do little tricks. I mean, I think that my readers know that sometimes I try to be a little bit clever in how I trick them to hang in there with me. So what are some of the other things? Because I was just talking with newsletters, and you probably know that what to put in a newsletter is like really every author is like, what do I have to say that has any meaning?
Oh, okay. Well, to be fair, actually, I have never had that concern. I have always thought of my newsletter as just an email to my readers, an email update. I don't think of it as having any kind of formal structure or needing to have certain components. But I do often struggle with what to say. Not that I don't think, I don't struggle with, I don't have anything to say. I often have to like censor myself down to keep it focused.
So what do you find gets the best response from your audience?
Pictures of me and my kids. So I have learned to include photos of my real life, like from Instagram. I'll just copy those pictures into my newsletter. They love that. They love glimpses at my real life.
Wow.
And I try to keep it pretty real and bring them in. Like when my writing production slowed down last year, I was pretty real with them about how I was struggling. And they were very supportive. They've always been super supportive.
Wow. That is awesome. That is so awesome. Do you send recipes in your newsletter?
No. No, I don't. I do post a lot of food pictures on Instagram, but I don't think I have ever sent a recipe. I will try that. I will tell them about this podcast.
You don't have to. It's a lot of women's go-to when they can't think of anything else. And I'm like, there's other stuff happening in your life. You don't have to send a recipe.
Yeah. And truthfully, the main reason why I don't include recipes is I rarely cook from them. Like, I'm very much a throw stuff together and hope for the best kind of cook.
A question about, oh shoot, you just said something and I was, shoot. I don't know.
Maybe circle back to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll circle back to it. Instagram. Because you've mentioned it a few times. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm not going to keep ignoring it anymore. I'm going to go down that path and ask you about Instagram.
Are we afraid of the Instagram?
What are you doing on Instagram?
Mostly posting pictures of my kids and food.
Is it working for readers?
Yeah. You sound like, I don't know. Okay, so I have been using Instagram for a long time as literally just a photo album. As Zoe, I've been using it actively as like my primary photo album.
Okay.
For like 4 years now. And I love it. I love the square photo just theme. The aesthetic of Instagram really resonates with me, but personally, not so much as an author.
Okay.
And just recently, I thought, I should be doing more stuff on Instagram as Ainsley. 3 years ago, I created my Ainsley Instagram account because I had one as Zoe, and I thought I should do stuff with that. And I created the account and I teased out a corner of the cover that would eventually be Prime Minister. And it was just the series name, A Frisky Beaver Story. And that was it. Like literally, then I did nothing for another year. And then I did nothing for another year. And then I did nothing for another year. Like it was once a year I would pop onto Instagram, do something with 5 pictures, and then abandon it again. And so if anybody listening to this has done that, know that I have also done that, and you are just fine. So don't worry. Then, like a month ago, not even a month ago, 3 weeks ago, I was like, you need to be more serious about Ainsley's Instagram. And so I really have kind of put a lot of energy into Instagram for Ainsley Booth. It's Instagram.com/Ainsley Booth Writes, if anybody wants to look at it.
Wink.
Right now. When will this podcast release?
Probably in a few weeks.
Okay. So at the time of recording, my Instagram feed is all purple because of the upcoming release of my next Ainsley book, Wicked Sin, which by the time this comes out, it will have already released. And then I'm going to roll into green as my next color of choice because I am an Instagram pro. A pro of all of 3 weeks experience. So my Ainsley Instagram is an example of me trying really hard to do Instagram the brand kind of way. Mm-hmm. And then my Zoe Instagram, which is Instagram.com/Zoe York Writes, is just authentic me brand. Now, I often talk to authors about like, you need to have a persona. You need it to be authentic. It does not need to be who you actually are in every way. You know what I mean?
You can pick and choose. I do know what you mean because I've talked to people about this. I think your author, the way I say it is like the way you act with your grandmother is different than the way that you act with your best friend. And they're both authentic parts of you. Like you're not being fake in one of them. They're just different parts of you.
And the same way you would go into a job interview, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's the person you are when you're at a book signing. That's the person you want to be on Instagram. And so my Zoe, like the problem with my Zoe Instagram feed, well, it is fabulous. It doesn't have books like literally anywhere on it. I don't think I've Instagrammed about a single release in months.
Okay.
So that's not ideal, but I do like the look of it. I like the engagement that I get. So I need to so my Ainsley Instagram is where I'm practicing all books all the time. And then I'm going to take my lessons learned from there and apply them over to my Zoe account. My Zoe account has like 2,000 followers almost.
Okay.
And, so like, I mean, I'm doing something right. Yeah. But it doesn't sell books. It's just brand building. And those two things are very different.
Okay. I'm going to ask if you would be willing to come back in 6 months or a year and talk about your Instagram experience.
Absolutely. I will happily report on my science experiment 1,000%.
Yeah. Because I've been like, there's a lot of people on Instagram. I personally, I really like some of the Instagram. Like they aren't branded except for that they have dudes with no shirts on and tattoos.
So that corner of Instagram is what Tumblr was for me for a very long time, like pure inspiration.
Yes. Inspiration. That's exactly why I'm looking at them.
I will say this, and this is my only caveat before I come back in 6 months and report on my Instagram success, is that Instagram is just the social media du jour. Right? It is what Facebook was 5 years ago. At any point, that can shift. We all need to remember that everything that we do is on top of a shifting pile of logs, you know? And you can't get too attached to something. You can't think this is the one thing that's going to be a changer for me, a game changer. Everything is a bit of a crapshoot, and you can try stuff, but the most important thing you can do, like I've talked a lot about Instagram, I've talked a lot about newsletters, the most important thing you can do, of course, is write the next book. Just head down, keep writing books. But every so often you have to come up for air and give your books a bit of visibility. And that's where Instagram comes in. That's where your Facebook group comes in. That's where your newsletter comes in.
Okay. You gave me a note, which I just was looking at, talking about Facebook groups.
Yeah.
And you said, ask me in the interview for my Uncle Matt story.
Okay. So I think I said earlier in the interview that I created my Facebook group like the day that I published my book. Like, well, it must have been a couple of days before, because in the back of every single one of my books is a link that says, if you want to hang out with me more, join my Facebook reader group. And I had that link in my books from day one. Mm-hmm. And nobody joined my groups except for my Uncle Matt and my critique partner and my sister and 2 very early on readers. And there were 5 people plus me in my group. That means that, by the way, my Uncle Matt bought one of my books, read it, got to the link at the end, clicked on it, joined my group. But I was desperate for members. And so I was like, yay, thank you for supporting me, Uncle Matt. And then, so that was June, July, August, September, he was in my group. And then in October, my first book, What Once Was Perfect, came out in a box set called Love for the Holidays with Noelle Adams and Samantha Chase. And it was a limited edition box set. Total game changer for me because my Christmas book was now re-releasing again at Christmas time.
Yay!
And I got to cross-pollinate a bit with their readership. And so I got an influx of people who joined my Facebook group, like 30 or 40 people over the next month, clicked on that link and joined my reader group. And suddenly chatter started to happen. Like nothing. I think maybe there'd been like 3 or 4 posts all by me, all getting my Uncle Matt, like giving the thumbs up on them in the first 4 months. I know what it's like to anybody who's new. I know what it's like to have an Instagram account where you post photos and nobody responds. I know what it's like to create a Facebook group and the only people who are in it are people who already know you and they feel like pity joins and it feels like crickets. It feels like nobody is going to respond. But if you don't create that group, if you don't have that link in your book at the end of your compilation, end of your entry in an anthology, then how are people going to join it? You must create it first. You must go through that awkward period of your Uncle Matt being your number one fan to have the platform to eventually hold on to the new readers that you eventually do find through the hard work of trying again. And don't worry, once you get an active reader group and you start sharing photos of men with no shirts on, Uncle Matt eventually leaves the group on his own accord.
I was going to ask, do your stories have sex scenes in them?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. My first book, the book that Uncle Matt bought and read through to the end, has like a blowjob with an Altoids scene.
Okay, I'm like, they're not fade to black. They're
no, they're filthy. And
well, small town romance.
I know. Yeah, no, that's the other thing that I broke a lot of rules with my small town series because it was what I wanted to read.
Yes.
But they're pretty dirty. They're pretty kind of modern and progressive. And I don't regret that for a second. But it does make for a little bit of jarring reader disconnect sometimes. Like for a while there, I had very small town covers on them. And that doesn't always match what people find inside the book.
No.
But that's okay. Live and learn for all of
it. Because I've read a lot of romance in my life. And so I'm like thinking of some of the small town romances. Like I think Christine Anderson is really good with small town romances. And yeah. It depends on hers whether they have sexy scenes or not. They're usually, anyways. I went to a movie one time with my grandparents and it was like Meet the Fockers 2, whatever that one was. The second one, whatever. I don't remember what it was called exactly, except for that I know that there was a scene with their grandparent, with like the in-laws doing like sex yoga. Oh. In the movie. And I'm sitting next to my grandpa and I'm like, this is so awkward. This is the most awkward thing I've ever done in my life. There's old people doing sex yoga positions. And I'm here.
We don't talk about the fact that there's dirty stuff in my books, but like my family is very supportive. And they're all kind of religious and I am very much not. And not kind of religious. They are very religious and I am very much not. And they still totally support me and love me and celebrate my books. And they're still friends with me on Facebook. Like I stopped being my real life name is Rebecca. And I stopped being Rebecca on Facebook because you just can't keep up two identities.
That's a lot.
And basically I was like, if you want to see pictures of my children, you have to follow me or friend me as Zoe. And so they all did. And that's lovely. They're wonderful people.
That's amazing. Like I'm getting a little teary eyed over here because not everybody has that.
It's true. I know that I'm lucky to have that experience.
Yeah. Can you tell me about some of your best advice for people who, and I know you've shared a lot of advice, but if you had to like narrow it down to like, okay, this is what I would say.
I would say that my advice is to have a plan, to stick to that plan, but also be very open to revising that plan. So don't make knee-jerk reactions. Don't react impulsively or emotionally to not selling books. Come up with a plan. Like let's say that your plan is to write 5 books in a fantasy romance series, right? And you see the arc and you release the first book and you only sell a handful of copies. You release the second book, you only sell a handful of copies. You might be like, I need to stop writing this series. But that wasn't your plan. Your plan was to write 5 books. So revise the plan not to change what you're going to write, but to amp up the marketing that you're going to do. You're going to make the first book in the series free when book 3 comes out. You're going to book ads for it. You're going to, pay for a BookBub feature release if you can get one. You're going to do lots and lots of release or review copies of the first book so that you can get enough reviews. Whatever the plan is, kind of amp up the plan rather than throwing it away because it's not good enough. Mm-hmm. One of the best pieces of advice I've gotten is if you try something and it doesn't work, it's definitely not going to work if you don't try again. But if you keep trying until you make it work, if you are doing something that could work, then you have to commit to keep working at it until it works, which does mean change, right? You cannot keep hammering away at exactly the same thing. You will get exactly the same result. If you don't like the result, you must have some change in the mix, but the mix does not need to change as much as you think it does. Little tiny changes. Keep at it. Keep working on your craft, because often it's a craft. I can look back at my early books and I can see little craft differences that that are different from how I write now. But more often than craft, it's about the external stuff, the marketing stuff, the visibility, the reach. So many writers are introverts. So stick to your plan, but change and boost your plan so that you're spending some time getting your books visibility too. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. It's, I mean, I had you guys, Jonathan Yanez did this, interviewed with me like a way long time ago, but he's really successful now. And he's like, you have like 2 choices. You either keep going or you give up.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's so true. And the thing is that some people start not quite in the right place, but they're probably closer to the right place than they think they are.
Yeah. Like it might just be a different blurb.
It might be a different blurb. It might be different branding. Mm-hmm. Like when I started writing, at the top, I talked about how I finished reading a series and I wanted to read something just like that, but set in Canada. That series was Lucky Harbor by Jill Shalvis. But what I ended up writing is not exactly like Jill Shalvis. Like she never mentions body parts in her sex scenes. Her books are very sexy, mm-hmm. but they're also very euphemistic, or they just don't make she'll talk about a guy going down between a girl's legs, but not be specific in what he does there. And I'm specific in what he does there. Mm-hmm. That means that I thought that I was writing closer to her than I actually was. And that objectivity of being able to look at your work and actually place it correctly in your genre, that takes a lot of practice. That takes a lot of tough skin and hearing feedback and revising and revising and revising your packaging, your branding, your blurb, your cover, until you actually are sitting your book next to where it belongs on the shelf, next to books that are actually like it.
Oh my gosh. I don't know if everybody's feeling this the way I'm like, oh, this is so big. It's so big because there's such a, like, it's all combined with finding your identity as a writer, finding mm-hmm. like, cause when you first start anything, you don't know.
No.
Like you could, when you first start, if you were painting, if you were cooking, if you were mm-hmm. like, you follow other people's recipes that you think you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Not you. With the recipes, bad analogy, but generally,
no, I do follow recipes, but you're right. Like when I say I am a very amateur family chef, like super amateur, because I don't put the time in to elevate my cooking craft, mm-hmm. and
yeah. So sorry, I'm interrupting. Go ahead.
And no, that's okay. And somebody could be a very amateur genre fiction romance writer, right? They could just be writing like whatever kind of makes them happy. Their work isn't going to resonate in the market as much as somebody who is more mindful of where their books sit in the marketplace.
And that takes time.
Yeah. It does.
It takes time and experience. It's not something necessarily that you can get from the first book on, because you don't even know what you're writing. You don't even know what your writing voice is necessarily when you're first. You're like, oh, I want to write something like Jill Shalvis. And then you're like, actually, this isn't like Jill Shalvis, but you didn't know that until you'd actually written it.
The people who, and every so often you will see somebody who just, they launch and their debut book is smack on, like it's perfect. Mm-hmm. Those people, they have already done that work kind of unconsciously and probably invisible to the reader by participating in the market in another way. Often in romance, they're book bloggers. And those book bloggers have read so many books and put together so many branded packages for promos or whatever that they absolutely know what their core story is. And so when they go to write it, that's what they write. You know, they've done that pre-work in a different way.
Yeah. I read a book by Elizabeth Hayden a long time ago, Rhapsody. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this is her first book? Oh my gosh. But then it turns out she was an editor.
Yeah. I mean, often editors, when they finally get the story that they want to tell in their own voice, editors are amazing writers. Elizabeth Dyer is an example of a romantic suspense author who has, I think, 2 books out. She released 2 books last year, and they both just finaled in the Ritas because she's an amazing writer and she's an editor.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's okay. Whew. Like that, you just kind of, my mind was like, pew, when you did that, because I'm like,
which doesn't mean that somebody who has a couple of like really slow, really quiet releases or like 20 of them can't bump their work up to the next level. Not at all. Mm-mm. But it takes work and it takes mindful work to get to that mastery point.
Mm-hmm. And you have to be willing to look and see what's not working. Which is hard because your ego is like, but I love these book covers or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about a lot of your stories. Mm-hmm. Which one would you say people should start with, and where can they find you and it?
Yeah. So all of my books are available on all of the major ebook retailers, and also in paperback. A really good place to start would be Pine Harbor #1, which is called Love in a Small Town, and it's free. And yep, I like to make at least one book in most of my series free so that people can just give me a try. If they like my voice, then there's a lot of other books that you can kind of glom through after that. So Love in a Small Town is a great place to start if you are interested in my Zoe books. If you are interested in my Ainsley books, then, oh man, Ainsley's kind of a complicated creature because there's actually so many different series. I would recommend starting with Prime Minister, which is a series that the series is called Frisky Beavers that I co-wrote with Sadie Haller. And Prime Minister is not free, but well worth the pennies, I promise you. And it is my take on the older man, younger woman, set in a political backdrop. But it's like, I really challenge people to, like, if you're like, no, I don't like that older, younger thing, give it a try. Like, I promise I love the book. And of course, if I love the book, everyone should. But Prime Minister is like hugely popular. We hit the USA Today list with that twice, both when it released and then a year later when we put it on sale. And really, like, people love Gavin and Ellie, and we're very, very proud of what we did there. So
okay. I'm going to go check that out because I like the older man, younger woman.
Yeah. Then if that's not a hard sell for you, then I promise you Prime Minister is your thing.
Yeah. But I don't usually like political stuff, but
it's Canadian politics. So it's very polite.
Oh, okay. Canadian politics. Maybe I can do that because I'm like, politics.
And did you ever watch The West Wing?
Yes. I have all the, yes, I love The West Wing. So, it's one of my favorite shows of all time.
At the start of the book, at the start of Prime Minister, I have we put in an author's note that say, we apologize to anybody who actually works in politics because none of this is realistic. It is more realistic than not, I think. But the Prime Minister's office, PMO, has a staff of like hundreds of people. And in the book, it's like 8 people.
Okay.
Because it doesn't matter. The politics is just the backdrop to the romance.
Okay.
So it is a political romance for people in the sense of like The West Wing is a political TV show. it is a little bit fan fiction-y in that it's my homage to The West Wing if it focused on
I'm
just
for
one.
sure watching it. I'm for sure reading this because I actually have a cat named Charlie. And I was like, when I got him, I was like, should I name my cat Charlie or Toby?
Okay. So I don't, so this is never obvious to anybody, but my 2 pen names are Zoe and Ainsley. And that's deliberate. Like,
Ainsley Hayes, Zoe Bartlett.
Yes. Yes.
Oh my gosh. I just like.
We have jokes that if I were to create a third pen name, it would be CJ something.
Yes. Oh, she's so good. She's so good. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay. I just freaked out a little bit over here. Okay. But is there one place where people can, or do you have like websites where people can go to?
ZoeYork.com and AinsleyBooth.com. Okay. And if you search for either of my pen names on any of the social media sites, you'll find me. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram.
Okay. Perfect. Oh my gosh. This ended on a really good note for me.
Yay!
Like, I'm like, my hands are like, oh my gosh. Yeah. So I'm very excited to go check some of these things out. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And you guys, everybody, bosses, thank you for listening. Hugs and happy authoring here at Author Like a Boss. Hey, boss, you made it to the end of the episode. You're the best. Because of that, I'm going to give you a special invitation to find out more about the Author Boss Academy, where I and a bunch of really awesome authors hang out, have fun, and get stuff done. If you end up joining, tell me the secret word and you'll get a special bonus. Find out more about the Academy at authorlikeaboss.com/academy. The secret word is nipples. Hugs and happy authoring. I hope to see you soon.
If you love the Author Like a Boss podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes. Until next time.